Welcome to HFY Vanguard. Every tale here proves the galaxy will never forget humanity, and it all starts right now. The coffee maker hissed like an angry cat spitting steam and sparks into Rick Thorne's face. Most people would have flinched. Rick didn't. After 5 years of fixing broken appliances in the grimiest corners of Atlas Prime's underbelly, he'd developed a healthy tolerance for electric shocks. Or maybe he just stopped caring enough to move out of the way. The cramped workshop smelled of burnt circuits, recycled station air, and the faint metallic tang of the asteroid ore shipments that passed through this deck. A greasy light from the aging overhead fixture flickered in uneven pulses, occasionally dimming entirely whenever the station's ancient power grid hiccuped. Around him, shelves overflowed with scavenged parts. Half were tagged for repair jobs. The other half were spare pieces Rick swore he'd eventually use but never did. Toaster, he muttered, without looking up, poking at the machine's corroded innards with a magnetic probe run a diagnostic scan. The helper drone, a battered sphere with wobbly anti-grav stabilizers and dents from years of mishaps, floated forward on a lazy arc. Its casing caught the harsh station lights, making the scratches shine like scars from a lifetime of bad decisions. A thin holographic display flared to life over its surface. Scanning. Caffeine delivery system. Critical failure. Recommend immediate replacement. Rick snorted. Yeah, well, tell that to Mrs. Rodriguez on Deck S. She swears this antique's been in her family for 3 generations. Probably worth less than the power bill to fix it, but she's paying me triple hazard rates to keep it alive. He switched all tools, reaching for a sonic screwdriver that hummed faintly in his palm. The sound was almost soothing, a reminder that while the galaxy spun itself into knots with politics and war, he could still coax life out of stubborn machines. It was simpler, predictable, safe. A commotion outside broke that illusion. At first, he tried to ignore it. Atlas Prime always had noise. Dock workers shouting, cargo loaders whining under heavy loads, the occasional bar fight spilling into the quarters. But this was different, sharper, urgent. A clash of boots, a muffled cry, the distinct hiss of armored joints. Through the grime-coated viewport, he caught glimpses of movement, 2 massive figures in black armor, dragging someone between them. A flash of violet skin, silver hair that shimmered unnaturally under the station's cold lighting. Not our problem, Rick muttered. Toaster's sensors words swiveling toward the door with nosy interest. Don't even think about it, Rick warned. The drone beeped in what could only be described as robotic defiance and bobbed toward the workshop exit. Toaster, get back here, you defective excuse for a kitchen appliance, Rick hissed, dropping a screwdriver and lunging after it. By the time he reached the threshold, the drone had already rolled, floated really into the corridor, weaving unsteadily directly into the path of the armored escorts. What happened next could have been scripted as slapstick if it weren't so dangerous. Toaster clipped the knee of one guard, sending the man stumbling sideways. In the process, the chain that ran from the guard's gauntlet to a sleek, ornate collar around the prisoner's neck jerked taut. The prisoner, no. The woman jerked forward. Rick, reaching for his wayward drone, still had the active magnetic probe in his grip. The tip brushed the collar's lock plate. There was a melodic click, like the chime of an ancient music box. The collar fell away, clattering to the deck. Time froze. Rick found himself staring into the most startling green eyes he'd ever seen. They were bright and unyielding, like emeralds lit from within. Her violet skin shimmered in the station light, a color so rich it looked like it belonged to another universe. Silver hair floated around her head in the artificial gravity, catching the light like strands of molten starlight. Her lips curved into a slow smile, and something about it made his pulse trip over itself. You have removed my collar, she said, her voice carrying a melodic lilt that made the words feel like part of a song. According to the ancient laws of my people, we are now bound in marriage. Rick blinked. What? The guards recovered fast. One growled, reaching for a weapon. Do you have any idea what you've done? This is Lady Fleur La Meridian. He never finished the sentence. The woman, Lady Fleur, moved like a bolt of liquid mercury. Her ceremonial robe swirled as she dropped into a stance that seemed as much art as combat. In one fluid motion, she stripped the weapon from the guard's hands and sent him sprawling to the deck. The second barely had time to draw his blaster before she had his arm twisted behind his back, the weapon now hers. Husband, she said lightly, as if she hadn't just dismantled two armed men in under 10 seconds. I suggest we find somewhere private to discuss our future. Rick looked from the fallen guards to Toaster, whose display now flashed "Congratulations on your nuptials" in cheerful blue. I don't suppose there's a return policy on accidental marriages, he muttered. Fleur's laugh rang like a bell, pleased predatory. Oh, my dear human, you have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. And then she was moving toward him with that same confident, almost feline grace, closing the space between them as the corridor alarms began to blare. The station's klaxons wailed a grating blend of mechanical sirens and recorded security protocols barking over each other. Somewhere in the chaos, Rick's self-preservation instinct screamed run, but his feet didn't get the memo, mostly because Lady Fleur had just grabbed him by the arm. Her grip was firm, almost searing through the sleeve of his oil-stained jacket. Move, she ordered, already steering him down the corridor. Hey, wait, hold on. Rick stumbled to match her long, confident strides. I'm not with whatever this is. I fix coffee makers. I avoid gunfights. Congratulations, she said dryly. You failed spectacularly today. They rounded a corner, Toaster bobbing along beside them with the unshakable cheer of someone or something completely unaware of mortal danger. The drone's display now played a looping pixel art of two interlocked rings, occasionally interrupted by celebratory fireworks. Rick swore under his breath. Toaster, kill the wedding graphics before someone shoots you. The drone ignored him. Behind them, the thud of armored boots and the hiss of comm units echoed through the metal corridors. Fleur moved like she owned the place, or at least owned the right to ignore its rules. She didn't check corners so much as flow around them, her silver hair trailing like a comet's tail. Where are we even going? Rick asked between breaths. Away from the guards toward your workshop, she said without looking back. My workshop, that's not an escape route. That's a cluttered death trap with a leaky coolant pipe. Exactly, she replied, flashing him a quick grin over her shoulder. A place they won't expect a princess to hide. They skidded to a halt as two more security officers turned into the hallway ahead. Fleur didn't hesitate. She tossed the captured blaster to her left hand, drew a slim blade from somewhere in her robes, and lunged. The movement was so fast, Rick almost didn't process it. One guard went down with a sweep of her leg. The other found his weapon, kicked from his grip before his hand could tighten on the trigger. Rick ducked behind a bulkhead panel, heart pounding, watching her fight. She didn't just overpower them, she outmaneuvered them. Every strike and block was precise, economical, a dance choreographed long before she stepped into the corridor. By the time he dared to peek again, both guards were on the floor groaning. Fleur retrieved the blaster, tossed it back to him. Hold this. He caught it clumsily. I don't do guns. You do now, she said, already moving again. They cut through an access corridor, reeking of hot coolant, the dim emergency lights making everything look like a scene from an old noir film, one where the hero wasn't sure if he'd been kidnapped or recruited. Toaster beeped a warning, multiple heat signatures approaching from rear. Rick glanced back, muttering, Why do I feel like this is your fault? But the drone didn't answer. It had switched to projecting a crude wireframe map of the station, highlighting their position with an unhelpfully large blinking heart icon. Fleur stopped suddenly at a sealed maintenance hatch. Can you open this? Rick looked at the keypad. Sure, if you want to wait 20 minutes for me to bypass the security protocols. You have 10 seconds. 10 seconds isn't... He caught her gaze, sharp, expectant, utterly certain he would do it. Right. 10 seconds. He dropped to one knee, pulling a multi-tool from his belt. His fingers moved on instinct, bypassing the code plate's biometric scanner and looping the station's access subroutine into thinking it had already been authenticated. The lock hissed open at exactly the 9th second. Not bad for a coffee maker repairman, Fleur said. It's a transferable skill set, said he muttered, stepping inside. The hatch led into a narrow maintenance shaft lined with dusty pipes and conduit bundles. Rick had spent enough time in similar crawl spaces to know they were perfect for staying out of sight and equally perfect for getting lost in a maze of dead ends. They crouched as they moved the shaft, forcing them into close quarters. Rick tried not to notice the subtle, exotic scent clinging to her robes, something like charged air after a thunderstorm mixed with flowers that couldn't possibly exist on Earth. Behind them, distant clanging on the hatch signaled that their pursuers had found the shortcut. How many people are after you exactly? Rick asked. Enough to make your week interesting, she replied without breaking stride. They emerged into an auxiliary loading bay, empty except for a stack of cargo crates and the faint hum of the station's outer hull vibrating under their feet. Through a viewport, Rick could see the sprawl of Atlas Prime's docking arms reaching into the void, their lights flickering like constellations. "This way," Fleur said, heading for the opposite door. "No, wait!" Rick grabbed her arm, surprising even himself. "That door leads straight into the customs zone. Too many cameras, too many armed patrols. You have a better idea." He pointed toward a service lift tucked into the corner. "It's on a separate security loop. Half the cameras are dead because station maintenance refuses to fund the repairs. Drops us 2 decks down right next to my workshop." Fleur considered this, then nodded. "Lead the way, husband." They reached the lift just as Toaster let out a cheerful ding and displayed a cartoon of 2 people holding hands. Rick jabbed the control panel, willing the rickety platform to move faster. The descent was painfully slow, the faint mechanical grind sounding like it might give out any second. Rick shifted his weight blaster, still awkward in his hand. "So," he said, trying for casual, "how does this ancient marriage law of yours actually work? Is there paperwork?" "It is older than paperwork," Fleur said, eyes fixed on the single flickering bulb overhead. "A collar like mine cannot be removed except by one worthy to become a Lamaran spouse. No force, no theft, only by triggering the lock's chosen frequency. I didn't trigger anything on purpose. I was just trying to stop Toaster from getting flattened." Her smile was faint but unmistakably smug. "The universe doesn't believe in accidents." He decided not to argue, not when the doors finally creaked open and spilled them into the dim, cluttered comfort of his workshop. Fleur stepped inside, scanning the room with a soldier's caution. "Charming," she said, eyeing the stacks of disassembled appliances, the wall of mismatched tools, and the faint smell of burnt toast. "It's organized chaos," Rick said defensively. Toaster floated past them, projecting a shower of digital confetti over the workbench. "Welcome home, newlyweds," flashed across the display. Rick pressed the heel of his hand to his forehead. "We are not keeping that as our relationship status." Fleur ignored the protest, moving deeper into the room. "You've been hiding in here for years, haven't you?" "Not hiding, just choosing my battles, which usually means avoiding all of them." She turned to face him fully, her green eyes bright in the workshop's uneven light. "That ends now." Before he could ask what she meant, the workshop's proximity alarms tripped, bathing the room in red light. The display on Toaster's casing switched to a grainy security feed, half a dozen black-armored figures moving down the corridor toward them. Fleur's hand went to the hilt of her blade. "They found us." Rick glanced at the blaster in his own hand, then back at her. "I told you this place was a death trap." "You said that like it's a bad thing," she replied, stepping toward the door. "Time to see if my new husband can handle a little trouble." Rick groaned. "I fix coffee makers." "Not today, you don't." The first pounding fist hit the workshop's sealed hatch, rattling it on its hinges. Rick's pulse quickened, and for the first time in years, he felt that dangerous electric edge of unpredictability. And he wasn't entirely sure he hated it. The pounding on the hatch grew louder, a steady metallic drumbeat against the thin barrier separating them from trouble. Dust sifted down from the ceiling with each blow. The seal wouldn't last long. Rick backed toward the workbench, his brain running a frantic inventory of every gadget, half-finished project, and outright illegal modification he had been tinkering with. There was no security plan for this workshop, unless you counted the passive-aggressive "no solicitors" sign duct taped to the door. Fleur moved with unhurried precision, checking the charge on the blaster she'd taken and sliding her slim blade back into its sheath. "They're professionals," she said, her voice steady. "Won't waste time on talk once they're inside." "That's comforting," Rick muttered. He reached for a cluster of tools and parts, sweeping them toward himself like a gambler pulling in chips. Toaster locked down the outer hatch. The drone let out an indignant beep. Outer hatch integrity compromised. Estimated breach 37 seconds. Fleur's eyes flicked to the display. 37 seconds is generous. "Can you fight?" "I can improvise," Rick said, already slotting a cylindrical component into a small handheld emitter. Also known as "I can make things explode in vaguely intentional ways." Before Fleur could ask what he meant, the workshop's comm unit mounted haphazardly to the wall crackled to life. Richard Alexander Thorne, a familiar voice, barked sharp as a whip crack. "What in the 7 systems have you done now?" Rick froze. "Oh no." Fleur tilted her head. Friend of yours? Define friend. He crossed the room and slapped the comm panel. The flickering holoprojector threw a life-sized image into the air. A stern-faced woman in an Earthfleet admiral's uniform, silver-streaked hair, pulled into a severe bun posture, like a battleship at anchor. Fleur's eyes widened. Your mother is an admiral. Rick winced. Mom, this really isn't not a good time, Admiral Sarah Steelstorm. Thorne's voice cut clean through his protest. Darling, I'm looking at security feeds from Atlas Prime showing you abducting a violet-skinned dignitary while armed guards flail in your wake. Do you have any idea how many diplomatic protocols that violates? Rick opened his mouth, closed it again. In my defense, Fleur stepped forward, utterly unfazed by the Admiral's glare. With respect, Admiral, your son did not abduct me. In fact, he— Oh, call me Sarah, the Admiral interrupted, her tone softening with surprising speed. Or Mom, if you prefer. And don't worry about protocol, dear. I've seen Richard's sock drawer. Nothing can shock me now. Rick's face flushed. Mom, Richard, Sarah said smoothly, is that a blaster in your hand? Did I not teach you to always keep the safety engaged unless you intend to shoot? From the hatch came the shriek of stressed metal as the outer lock began to shear. Fleur's gaze darted toward the sound, but her voice remained steady. We're about to have company. Understood, Sarah replied. I've already dispatched a stealth courier to your coordinates. ETA 8 minutes. Hold out until then. Rick stared. You just track me down in the middle of Atlas Prime in under an hour. Please, Sarah said, a hint of pride in her voice. I locked onto Toaster's unique anti-grav stabilizer signature. That poor thing hasn't been calibrated in months, has it? The drone beeped indignantly. Before Rick could defend his maintenance schedule, a thunderous clang shook the hatch, and the locking mechanism finally gave way. Breach in 3, Toaster warned 2. The door slammed inward. Black armored figures flooded the room. Weapons raised visors glinting in the harsh workshop lights. Fleur moved first, a blur of violet and silver. Her blade caught the nearest mercenary across the weapon arm, sending his blaster spinning. She kicked another squarely in the chest, the impact echoing through the cluttered space. Rick didn't think he reacted. His makeshift emitter hissed to life, spitting a crackling arc of ionized plasma that danced along the floor. It wasn't lethal, not exactly, but the closest two intruders convulsed as the shock seized their armor's servos. Fleur glanced over her shoulder, the ghost of a smile tugging at her lips. Not bad, husband. The fight surged around them, a chaotic blend of grunts, shouts, and the clang of metal on metal. Rick dove behind a stack of decommissioned vending units, jerry-rigging a secondary defense. A repurposed coolant line that, when overpressurized, erupted in a cloud of freezing vapor. 2 mercenaries stumbled into it, their visors frosting instantly. From the hollow projector, Sarah's voice came crisp and calm, as if she were watching a training exercise. Fleur, keep their attention on you. Richard, you have always been better with your hands than with your aim. Make that count. Rick gritted his teeth, working on it. Toaster zipped overhead, deploying a small disc from its undercarriage. A shimmer of blue light sprang up, forming a modest energy shield between Rick and the bulk of the attackers. Blaster bolts hissed against it, lighting the air with strobing flashes. The mercenaries adapted quickly. One vaulted the workbench, swinging a shock baton toward Rick's head. He ducked, jabbing the emitter into the attacker's knee joint. The armor's servos locked up with a satisfying whine. Fleur, in the center of the room, fought like water flowing through stone, never stopping, always redirecting. She used the cramped space to her advantage, forcing her opponents into each other's line of fire. Her blade flickered blaster shots, ricocheting off its energy edge. Rick risked a glance at the countdown on Toaster's display courier arrival in 0214. They just had to hold out 2 more minutes. Then the hatch to the secondary corridor blew inward in a shower of sparks. A new figure stepped through, taller and broader than the rest armor, trimmed in crimson. The air seemed to tighten around him, the kind of presence that made trained soldiers straighten without thinking. His voice was distorted through a modulator, but the contempt bled through. Hand over the princess. Fleur's eyes narrowed. Tell your Duke I said no. I am the Duke's fist, the figure growled, raising a weapon that hummed with lethal energy. Rick's brain spun into overdrive. This wasn't a skirmish, they were seconds from being overwhelmed. He reached under the workbench and yanked out a spherical device wrapped in caution tape. "What is that?" Fleur asked without looking away from the crimson-armored soldier. "Something that'll make us very unpopular with station maintenance," Rick said. He thumbed the activator and tossed it into the center of the workshop. The device detonated with a deep whoomp, releasing a pulse that inverted the local gravity field. Everything Mercenary's tools, loose parts, lifted toward the ceiling in a slow, dreamlike drift. "Go," Rick shouted. Fleur didn't hesitate. She grabbed his arm, and together they vaulted into the maintenance chute at the back of the workshop, Toaster zipping in after them. They slid, for what felt like forever, the sounds of confusion and shouted orders fading behind them. The chute spat them out into a dim service bay, where the stealth courier hovered its sleek black hull, absorbing the light. The ship's hatch slid open, revealing no pilot, just an empty cabin ready for immediate departure. Sarah's voice came over the comm, laced with satisfaction. "Nice timing, as always. Get aboard and I'll brief you en route." Rick stumbled inside, adrenaline still spiking. Fleur followed her blade, now sheathed, but her posture coiled, ready for another fight. Toaster rolled into a docking port with a happy chime. As the hatch sealed behind them and the ship lifted away from the station, Rick finally exhaled. So he said, dropping into one of the cabin's crash seats, "Still think hiding in my workshop was a good idea." Fleur's answering smile was all sharp edges and unspoken promises. "You kept me alive. That's a good start." Rick leaned back, closing his eyes. Somewhere in the chaos, he'd crossed a line from bystander to participant, from avoiding trouble to owning it, and disturbingly, he wasn't sure he wanted to cross back. The stealth courier banked hard, the inertial dampeners compensating just enough to keep Rick from smashing into the bulkhead. Through the narrow viewport, Atlas Prime shrank into a glittering wheel against the void. The chaos they'd left behind, mercenary security alarms, and one very angry crimson-armored enforcer, was now a smear of distant lights. Rick still hadn't unclenched his grip on the armrest. "Remind me," he said to Fleur, "why you were in chains in the first place." She didn't answer right away. Her gaze was fixed on the stars, slipping past the cold reflections, casting a pale sheen across her violet skin. "Because my father promised me to the Duke of the Crimson Nebula," she said finally. "It was supposed to be a political alliance sealed during the ceremonial removal of my collar." Rick let out a sharp laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Guess I crashed that party." Her lips curved, spectacularly. He should have stopped there, but curiosity, or maybe self-preservation, pushed him on. "So this Duke, what's his problem, besides having henchmen who like to break into my workshop?" Fleur's smile faded. "His problem is that he's ruthless, ambitious, and backed by Necrotech Corporation. Together they want the all-right deposits on Lamera. Without the marriage, the Duke loses his claim, and so do his corporate allies." Rick rubbed the back of his neck. "And now they're gunning for you, and by association me." "Correct." Her tone was matter-of-fact, but her eyes softened slightly as they met his. "You could walk away, drop me at the nearest neutral port." The idea had merit on paper, but something in him resisted it, the same stubborn streak that once kept him awake 40 hours straight to reprogram a fleet targeting system just to win a simulation match. "Yeah," he said, "I could, but I won't." Before she could reply, Toaster's display flickered. Incoming transmission. The drone swiveled to face them, projecting a full-scale holo into the middle of the cabin. The figure that appeared was regal in every sense, tall, broad-shouldered, robed in garments that shimmered with woven, crystalline threads. A crown of pale blue eight rested upon his brow. His skin was a deeper violet than Fleur's, his green eyes sharp and commanding. "Father," Fleur said, bowing her head. Rick scrambled to his feet and attempted something that might have been a bow, if you were generous. In truth, it looked more like he was about to fall over. The Emperor's gaze settled on him with the weight of a star. "So, the reports are true. My daughter's collar has been removed by a human." Rick swallowed. Yes, Your Majesty. Pure accident, I assure you." "Accidents," the Emperor said slowly, "do not happen with Lamaran collars. The seers tell me the unlocking was genuine, that you are now bound to my daughter by ancient law." Rick opened his mouth to protest, but Fleur's subtle shake of the head silenced him. The Emperor's expression hardened. "Do you understand what you have done? The Duke threatens war. Necrotech's fleets mass at our borders. And my heir is now bonded to a man who his gaze flicked to Toaster Repair's beverage dispensers." "Really good beverage dispensers," Rick muttered before he could stop himself. A silence followed. Then to Rick's surprise, the Emperor's stern expression eased. The collar chose you. My daughter seems happier than she has in years. So I will make you an offer. Rick didn't like the way Fleur straightened at those words. What kind of offer? Defend Lamera, the Emperor said. Prove yourself worthy of my daughter's hand. Stop Necrotech from stealing our world's heart. Do this, and I will acknowledge your union officially. And if I refuse, Rick asked. The Emperor's smile was not entirely pleasant. Then I suppose we will discover whether your little drone's shield generator can withstand a planetary bombardment. Rick blinked. That's not much of a choice. Consider it an opportunity, the Emperor said. I await your answer. The transmission cut, leaving the cabin in heavy silence. Rick exhaled slowly. Well, that could have gone worse. Fleur arched a brow. He threatened to blow you up. Yeah, Rick said, but he didn't actually do it. That's progress. She stepped closer, her voice dropping. You don't have to do this. We could disappear, go somewhere even Necrotech wouldn't think to look. Running sounds great, Rick admitted. Big fan of running. Running is my favorite tactical maneuver. Her hand brushed his, the contact sending that same electric jolt through him as before. Then why not run? Rick looked down at their joined hands, then at Toaster, who was pretending to be busy cleaning its own casing. Because I've spent my whole life avoiding things, responsibilities, challenges, relationships. Maybe it's time I fought for something. Her smile was radiant, the kind that could convince someone to jump into hyperspace without a nav plan. Does this mean you're accepting our marriage? Let's call it a trial period, he said, with the understanding that if we survive, we need to have a serious talk about your father's tendency toward dramatic ultimatums. Toaster beeped happily as if sealing the agreement. Fleur's laugh was soft but genuine. Then we fight, Rick groaned. I was afraid you'd say that. The stealth courier slipped into the shadow of a drifting ore hauler, its quantum shielding humming faintly through the deck plating. Outside, the stars drifted by like cold, distant lanterns. Inside, the air was heavy with unspoken decisions. Rick sat at the small navigation console, staring at the holographic star map without really seeing it. His fingers traced idle patterns over the edge of the display, but his mind was elsewhere, back in the workshop, in the corridors of Atlas Prime, in the look on Fleur's face when the Emperor had given his ultimatum. He'd spent years designing his life to avoid exactly this kind of moment. The kind where your choices mattered to more than just yourself. The kind where walking away wasn't the simplest, safest answer. Fleur's reflection appeared in the glossy surface of the console before she spoke. You're quiet. I'm thinking, Rick said. Dangerous habit for someone who claims to avoid complications. He managed a small smile. I'm trying to decide if I'm a complete idiot. She stepped closer, leaning one hip against the console. For staying or for getting involved in the first place? Both. He turned in his chair to face her. I fix appliances, Fleur. I'm good at it. I enjoy it, and I'm not exactly itching to swap that for interstellar politics and assassination attempts. Her gaze was steady, but there was no mockery in it. You've been in combat before. That was a long time ago, Rick said, and it was supposed to be the last time. She tilted her head. Your mother said you were top of your class at the Fleet Academy. He groaned. She would. Perfect scores in tactical simulations. I hacked the sim program so I could nap during battles, he admitted. Still counts as a perfect score. Fleur laughed softly. You hide behind laziness. But I've seen how your mind works. How you turn scraps and junk into tools that save lives. That emitter in your workshop. The coolant vapor trap. You don't think like other people. Rick shrugged, uncomfortable under the praise. Thinking like other people doesn't usually end well. She pushed away from the console, pacing a slow circle around the cabin. The Duke won't stop. Necrotech won't stop. My father's ultimatum may have sounded dramatic, but he wasn't exaggerating the danger. If they gain control of our all-right deposits, it won't just be Lamera that suffers. Rick leaned back in his chair, eyes following her. You're saying if I don't help, the galaxy burns. I'm saying if you do help, you can stop it. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the courier's engines. Finally, Rick spoke. You know, when I walked into my workshop this morning, my biggest concern was whether Mrs. Rodriguez's coffee maker could survive another week. Now I'm debating whether to go toe-to-toe with one of the most powerful corporations in the galaxy. Fleur's lips curved into a faint smile. Life is full of surprises. He looked at her, really looked. The way her silver hair caught the ambient light, the unwavering steadiness in her eyes, the way she seemed equally at home with a sword in her hand or teasing him into an argument. She was trouble. She was exactly the kind of complication he had spent his life avoiding. And yet, Rick sighed. All right, we'll fight. Fleur stopped pacing, her expression unreadable for a heartbeat. Then a spark of something warm lit in her gaze. Together, he smirked. Don't make me regret it. Toaster, who had been quietly recalibrating its stabilizers in the corner, beeped in approval. Initiating Operation Mutual Survival. Rick pointed at the drone. That better not be code for matchmaking. The ship's comm crackled with Sarah's voice. Glad to hear you've made up your mind, darling. I've been listening in, of course. I'll transmit Necrotech's latest fleet movements to you, might give you a head start. Rick frowned. You've been eavesdropping. Of course, Sarah said cheerfully. You're my son. It's in the job description. Fleur crossed her arms. What's the plan, Admiral? I'm sending you to a dead relay station on the edge of the Crimson Nebula, Sarah replied. Necrotech uses it to route low-priority data, meaning their encryption protocols there are lax. It should give Richard enough of a back door to their central systems. Rick leaned back, already running through possible breach methods in his head. Lax is good. Lax means lazy security. My favorite kind. Just remember, Sarah added, once you poke the nest, they'll come after you. Hard. Rick's smirk turned into something sharper. Let them try. The comm went dead. Fleur stepped closer, resting one hand lightly on his shoulder. You really are willing to do this? Yeah, he said. Not because your father threatened me, and not because my mom will never let me hear the end of it if I run. Because I've got something worth fighting for now. Her smile was slow, genuine. Then let's make sure you live long enough to enjoy it. Rick glanced at Toaster. You hear that? We're going to war with a mega corporation. Try not to burn the toast this time. The drone beeped indignantly. Victory is inevitable. Rick chuckled, though the weight of what they were about to do settled in his chest. He'd chosen his side, and for the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The stealth courier emerged from hyperspace on the far edge of the Crimson Nebula, its dark hull absorbing what little light filtered through the dense clouds of ionized gas. The nebula's reds and purples stretched endlessly, a swirling curtain that hid the jagged shadow of a derelict relay station. The station hung in the void like a rusted blade scarred by micrometeor impacts studded with the skeletal remains of old antennae. No running lights, no transponder pings, nothing to suggest it was anything but scrap. That's it, Rick asked, leaning over the cockpit rail as the relay filled the viewport. Looks like the galaxy's most depressing art installation. Fleur stood beside him, arms crossed, scanning the station with a soldier's suspicion. Perfect place for an ambush. Or Rick said perfect place to hide a lazy data hub. His grin was quick, sharp, the kind that meant trouble was brewing. Let's dock. The courier drifted in on silent thrusters, locking onto a half-collapsed docking ring. Inside, the station smelled like stale air dust and something faintly acidic, old coolant, maybe leaking from a forgotten conduit. Rick's boots crunched on debris as he stepped into the darkness, Toaster hovering at his shoulder with its lights casting faint blue halos across the bulkheads. This place is a tomb, Fleur murmured, her voice low. Not for long, Rick replied. Once I get the uplink running, it's going to be the busiest data node in the sector. They reached the relay control room, if you could still call it that. Panels hung open like broken jaws, wires dangling, displays dark. Rick dropped to one knee beside the main console, pulling a coil of fiber from his satchel. Step 1, rewire the uplink to bypass Necrotech's standard encryption handshake. Step 2, inject my own handshake key disguised as legacy maintenance code. Step 3, exploit the complacency of their low-priority data team. You're enjoying this, Fleur said. Rick's hands moved faster, his smirk widening. Guilty. This is my idea of a good time. Toaster beeped. Warning external sensor sweep detected. Rick didn't pause. Which direction? Starboard closing fast. Unknown configuration. Fleur moved to the viewport, eyes narrowing. Small gunship. No corporate markings. Rick muttered a curse. Freelance bounty hunters. She turned from the window, already pulling her plasma sword free. I'll keep them busy. You finish whatever you're doing. You don't have to. Rick started, but she was gone, her footsteps fading into the metallic echo of the station's corridors. He exhaled and focused on the task. The console's dead display flickered under Toaster's projected interface lines of code scrolling in mirrored bursts of green and amber. The drone synced with his wrist pad, and Rick began routing signal traces through half a dozen obsolete comm relays. Outside, the faint vibrations of weapons fire rumbled through the station structure. Cut to Fleur. The gunship had docked hard enough to make the metal groan. Two figures in mismatched combat armor clambered through the airlock, weapons up. Fleur moved from cover like a ghost, her plasma sword igniting in a hiss of violet light. The first bounty hunter went down with a sweeping strike that cut the barrel from his rifle. The second fired wild shots that sparked against the bulkhead before she slammed him into the wall hard enough to dent the plating. She caught a glimpse of three more shapes moving in behind them, heavier armor, better coordination. She smiled. Finally a challenge. Back in the control room, Rick's pulse quickened as Necrotech's network handshake accepted his forged credentials. He was inside. Now came the fun part. Rows of secured directories unfolded before him, each tagged with cryptic alphanumeric IDs. He traced data flows, looking for patterns, cross-referencing them with Sarah's intel. They're the all-right mining contracts. And beneath them, buried in legal subroutines, the algorithms Necrotech used to forecast yield and hide the real environmental destruction their methods caused. He grinned without humor. Gotcha. Contact Toaster beeped suddenly. Hostiles approaching from aft corridor. Rick cursed under his breath. Fleur's busy. Guess it's my turn. He slapped a magnetic clamp on the fiber cable, letting Toaster handle the rest of the data pole, and reached for the emitter still clipped to his belt. The first hostile through the door got a face full of overcharged ion burst, his visor flickering as his armor systems went haywire. The second rushed him with a blade, only to trip over the cable and crash into a bank of dead consoles. From down the hall, a plasma bolt sizzled past Rick's ear. He dove for cover, hard hammering Toaster status. Data transfer at 72%. Not fast enough. Cut back to Fleur. The bounty hunters pressed harder, now one forcing her to parry while another tried to flank. She pivoted, using the lead attacker's bulk as a shield against the other's fire, then drove her blade into a gap at the shoulder joint. Sparks burst from the armor as the hunter collapsed. A blaster report echoed from deeper inside the station Rick's position. Her eyes narrowed. Hold them, she told herself, and surged forward, blade whirling. Control room. Rick ducked behind the central console, the emitter's charge indicator blinking red. A mercenary shadow loomed over him, then dropped suddenly as Fleur's plasma sword carved a burning arc through the air. "Miss me?" she asked, stepping over the fallen attacker. Only when the shooting started, Rick said, breathless. Toaster status. Transfer complete. Payload deployed. Rick didn't wait for the drone's confirmation. He triggered the final subroutine, a timed cascade that would spread his access hooks into every Necrotech server node, prioritizing corporate leadership comms. Within minutes, their most sensitive data would be flagged as public and dumped into news feeds across the galaxy. They ran for the courier, the station shuddering around them as the gunship's engines roared. Fleur cut down another bounty hunter in the docking ring. Rick sent the last one sprawling with a sudden gravity inversion from a hacked deck panel. The moment they were aboard, Toaster sealed the hatch. "Punch it!" Rick yelled. The courier's drives flared, propelling them away from the relay. Behind them, the gunship broke off pursuit, either unwilling to follow into the nebula or too busy dealing with the tracking virus Rick had slipped into its navigation system. In hyperspace, Rick slumped into the co-pilot's seat, rubbing at his temples. "All right," he said. "Necrotech's about to have a very bad day. I just dumped proof of their illegal mining ops, environmental destruction, and a few, let's call them unflattering executive habits into every major news feed." Fleur lowered herself into the seat beside him, still catching her breath. "That will force them to retreat. It'll force them to defend themselves in the court of public opinion," Rick said. "And while they're scrambling to put out PR fires, we hit them again harder." She smiled faintly. "I like the way you think." Toaster beeped in satisfaction. "Operation Breakfast Special successful." Rick groaned. "We're not calling it that." Necrotech headquarters. Boardroom feed intercept. Dozens of executives shouted over one another as data scrolled across the wall screens. Damning reports, leaked contracts, security cam footage of shady meetings. The CEO, pale and sweating, barked for silence. Find the leak. One board member muttered, "It came from that repair tech. What's his name?" Back on the courier. Rick kicked his boots up on the console, a lazy grin spreading across his face. Now that he said was fun. Fleur's eyes softened as she looked at him. "You're enjoying this far too much," he shrugged. "Hey, some people play cards for fun. I dismantle mega corporations." Her laugh was warm, even if it still carried an edge of disbelief. "Then let's see how much further you can go." Rick leaned back, feeling the adrenaline fade into a steady hum. They'd scored the first blow, but he knew Necrotech wouldn't take it lying down. And that was fine, because for the first time in years, he was ready for the next move. The courier dropped out of hyperspace above Lamera, and the view hit Rick like a gut punch. From orbit, the planet looked like a piece of polished amethyst seas glimmering in rich violet hues under scattered clouds, continents veined with silver rivers that shimmered like molten metal under the twin suns. Elegant orbital platforms ringed the equator, their spires catching the light and casting it in long beams across the void. Fleur stood at the forward viewport silent. The planet's reflection in her green eyes was almost the same shade as her skin. Rick could tell without her saying a word that this wasn't just home. It was the weight of history duty and the crown she tried to escape. Toaster hovered nearby, scanning the incoming comms traffic. High priority transmission, sovereign encryption. Rick sighed. "Let me guess, dad-in-law." Fleur's lips quirked. He doesn't like being called that. The hollow projector flared and the Emperor's image filled the cabin. Today, he wore ceremonial armor, deep violet plates inlaid with gold, a matching cloak cascading over one shoulder. His expression was different. Not the cold steel from before, warmer, measured. "Richard Thorne," the Emperor said, inclining his head slightly. "Fleur." His gaze softened when it rested on her. "The Council has reviewed your unorthodox campaign against Necrotech." Rick braced himself for another threat. Instead, the Emperor continued, "It was effective. The corporation's fleets are pulling back. Their board has issued a public retreat from our borders, and he allowed himself the faintest smile. The Duke of the Crimson Nebula has taken an extended leave from public life." Rick blinked. Extended leave meaning? "A remote meditation retreat in the Outer Rim," the Emperor said, tone bland. "Far from politics, and farther from my daughter." Fleur's lips curved in satisfaction. "So the marriage alliance is null." "Indeed," the Emperor said, his gaze shifted to Rick. "You fought for my daughter in my war world when you had every opportunity to flee. You proved you are not merely a repairman." Rick raised a hand. "I'm still a repairman, just one who occasionally blackmails mega corporations for fun." The Emperor chuckled, a low rolling sound that Rick wouldn't have believed possible a week ago. "Then Lamera will honor its law. Your union stands officially recognized. The palace will make the announcement." Rick froze. "Wait, just like that? No trials, no more death threats." The Emperor's smile was dry. "You've already passed the trial. The threats will come from other quarters." Fleur stepped forward, bowing her head slightly. "Thank you, Father." The transmission ended, leaving the cabin in silence save for the courier's hum. Rick let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "So, we're married. For real. In the eyes of an entire planet." Fleur's smile was softer now, but there was mischief in her eyes. "Regretting it already?" He shook his head. "Honestly, I've been regretting a lot of things in my life. This isn't one of them." She moved closer, her voice dropping. "You're sure because Lamaran marriages? They're not casual. Once we're bonded fully, it's for life." Rick smirked. "I've survived plasma fire assassination attempts and my mother's matchmaking. I think I can survive you." Her laugh was quiet rich. "We'll see." They retreated to the courier's compact living quarters, leaving Toaster to manage docking procedures. The ship's ambient lighting had shifted to a softer glow, casting a warm hue over the small space. Rick suspected his mother had tweaked the settings remotely, because of course she had. Fleur sat on the edge of the narrow bunk, her ceremonial robe traded for a sleek combat tunic. Rick leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed. "You know," he said, "this is the part where the hero and the princess kiss roll credits, and everyone assumes it's happily ever after." She tilted her head, her silver hair spilling over one shoulder. "And what do you think, husband? Happily ever after?" He crossed the small space between them, slow enough to watch her pupils dilate. "I think happily ever after is a lot of work. and probably involves more assassins than the storybooks admit. Her lips curved. And yet you're still here. I told you, he said, leaning closer. I'm done running from things worth fighting for. The kiss was warm, steady, less the fire of their first chaotic moments together, more the certainty of two people who knew exactly what they were choosing. Her hand slid to the back of his neck, anchoring him there for a long moment. When they parted, her forehead rested against his. Careful, she murmured. I might start to believe you. Dangerous habit, he said. Later, with the ship gliding into Lamaran orbit, they stood at the viewport again. The capital city below sprawled like a jewel-dome structures, catching the sunlight, sky bridges threading between towers. The palace rose at the heart of it all, an intricate fusion of crystal and metal, half fortress, half sculpture. Fleur spoke without looking at him. Tomorrow there will be ceremonies, interviews. Your face will be on every news feed in the sector. Rick groaned. Great, exactly what I've always wanted to be famous for breaking someone's jewelry. Her smile turned wicked. That jewelry changed the course of 2 star systems. He slid his arm around her waist. Guess I better get used to being more than a guy who fixes coffee makers. She leaned into him slightly. And I'd better get used to my husband being a galactic hero. Rick laughed under his breath. That's pushing it. Toaster beeped from the console. Palace escort incoming, estimated arrival 20 minutes. Rick glanced at Fleur. You ready? Her gaze was steady, unflinching. With you always. You also convinced a planet to trust you, stared down a corporation, and let yourself be known. She turned, resting a palm against his chest. That's harder than hacking. He covered her hand with his. The air smelled like salt and fireworks. The moons painted silver lines along her hair. I keep thinking there's a catch, he said. Like tomorrow I'm going to wake up and it'll be back to the workshop and the broken coffee makers and pretending not to care. He huffed a laugh. That's my line. You taught me to steal it. She lifted onto her toes and kissed him slow, sure patient as tide. When they parted, she tucked her head under his chin and watched the surf. There will be consequences, she said finally. Necrotech retreats, but it does not forget. The Duke meditates, but ambition does not sleep. My father will smile, and then he will test you. Let him. Rick's voice surprised him, not bravado, not bluster. An even promise. I'm done being underestimated. I'm also done pretending I prefer it. She squeezed his hand. Good. They stood like that for a long time, newlyweds, at the edge of a very old ocean, listening to the planet breathe. Behind them, on a private channel tuned so low, it was almost a lullaby. Toaster pinged Sarah's secure frequency. Mission parameters, Phase 1 complete. Subjects romantically bonded and operationally aligned. Recommendation, allow unstructured bonding interval. Note, cake delivery protocol achieved 99.7% precision. Acceptable frosting variants. Sarah's reply came warm with satisfaction. Excellent work, little one. Objection, Toaster said. Not little, highly sophisticated. Of course, Sarah said, amused. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be interesting. On the beach, Rick felt Fleur relax against him, the tension of ceremony and spectacle easing out of her spine. He knew sleep wouldn't come easily. His brain was already sketching countermeasures, exit routes, contingency plans. But for once, the weight felt shared. Hey, he said as the waves stitched and unstitched the shore. If the universe keeps throwing complications at us, we'll throw them back, Fleur said. Together, Rick finished. Together, she echoed, and the words settled into the night like a vow. Far above the honor guard adjusted their orbits, bright points tracing patient arcs. The party roared and softened, roared and softened. The sea kept breathing, and on a quiet stretch of crystal sand, a human and a Lamaran, a strategist and a warrior, a repairman and a princess stood at the edge of everything exactly where they were meant to be.